Frank Lucas was born a poor black kid in the rural South, in LaGrange, North Carolina, a town of about 2,000 or 3,000.
The Country Boys was the nickname that was given to Frank Lucas's crew. They was all out of North Carolina. You know, both crews was out of North Carolina. And Frank Lucas's crew was called the Country Boys.
The white man ran him out of North Carolina. Well, he came to New York with some built-back overalls on. Didn't have, I don't know, I guess he must have walked here. I don't know how he came here. The mule kicked him, and he went to the house and got the gun and shot the mule and killed him. That was in North Carolina, and a white man's farm, and they ran him out of North Carolina.
Finally, he ended up in Harlem, barely into his teens, and according to Frank, he ended up at Penn Station and asked somebody, where do all the black people live? And the person said, Harlem.
At that particular time in Harlem, all of the buildings that the people lived in were totally and completely neglected. The city was taking over the buildings. I mean, if there was a fire, it wasn't repaired. Water hardly made it up to the top floor. It was rat infested. There were no jobs.
If you're going to dominate, you got to go where the major market is, and that was in Harlem. And when people talk about New York, they primarily are talking about one borough, and that's Manhattan.
Harlem in New York was just full of heroin. And down in lower Harlem, you know, the Italians ruled, and that's where the heroin center was. Okay, blacks are more up around 125th Street.
Moving large amounts of dope, dominating the scene in Harlem with some one or two other major heroin traffickers, pushing a lot of heroin on the streets of New York City.
Full-scale drug use.
And that was, I think, really the advent of open-air drug markets.
Harlem, man, Harlem was something. Harlem was, it was like no other place. I'd been all over the country. Nothing was like Harlem. It was a 24-hour spot, you know. The city, like they said, the city never slept. There was business going 24 hours. There was gambling going 24 hours, partying going 24 hours. Most of the people were nightlife people. In the daytime, the only people you saw outside was the numbers guys and the working guys, you know, that worked the supers and people of that nature.
By 1960, there began to have the beginnings of a civil rights movement.
When a Negro is born in America, he's dissatisfied, and dissatisfied Negroes know that Mr. Muhammad makes the best spokesman black people can have in this country.
A little known story that Mamie, Bubby's widow, shared with me is that when Malcolm X died in 1964, Bumpy went around to all of the businesses in Harlem and said, open up your cash registers, because you have to make a donation. And he took a little bit of something from everybody in order to pay for the funeral of Malcolm X.
Made a promise to Abraham that he would be a stranger in a foreign land. They would suffer and be afflicted 400 years.
Bumpy donated a lot of money. I don't know how much, because he never would tell me. But he went around to different people's registers and told them, open your register, give me something from Malcolm X.
And they meant something to the black community. We knew them. People in the white community didn't know them. They heard of them. And if you heard of a big drug deal, you just assume automatically it was the mafia or the whites having something to do with this drug dealer. They assumed that the drug dealer who was big in the black community worked for somebody who was white in the mafia. But that wasn't true.
You know, when the blacks, you know, once they got into Harlem, it was like, well, you know what? But now we're claiming this as ours.
Bumpy Johnson was the first who was the independent.
He introduced me to Bumpy Johnson, and Bumpy went on. He started talking. You know, he was a tough talking guy. He's no man, but he was a tough talker.
Bumpy was getting his package from the mafia because he had those connections.
But he was also known as a guy that could go to the Italians and get merchandise.
He was the meanest, baddest man in Harlem.
But the mobsters there knew wanted something, wanted to talk to him. They had a squabble going on. They would come to Bumpy. He would be the negotiator there, make things right.
I mean, the luckiest people in the world. I mean, this was back in the 30s. People were getting evicted left and right. If you were lucky enough to be getting evicted at a time that Bumpy Johnson was strolling by, you were in luck, because he never walked by and let the marshals just put your furniture out on the sidewalk.
Now, Bumpy used to work for the Italians, and then Bumpy went into business himself, and he's the first that I know of who was the man and didn't have to go through the Italians.
You know how you go out shopping, and he said to me he wanted chicken wings and lima beans for Sunday dinner. And that was never my stick. I always cooked a big roast or turkey or a big oven stuff and have a big dinner and have his friends. He said no. And then we had some more friends. That guy's in number business in Harlem right now, across the street. He can tell you this. They invited us over to their house that Sunday to have to a picnic. Bumpy didn't want to go. He says, no, I just want some chicken wings and some lima beans, and I'm going to rest tomorrow. That was the night he died.
I was in the U.S. Attorney's office, and I was given this case to prosecute against Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy died.
He died in 68, had a heart attack and died in 68.
1968. He died July 7th. And Bobby Kennedy died at the same time. King was the 4th of April. Bobby Kennedy was the 5th of June. Bumpy's was the 7th of July. The only thing Frank Lucas would do would meet him downstairs in the front of the Lennox Terrace and take Bumpy to the racetrack. Now, where Frank is getting these lies from that he stayed in the apartment with Bumpy and Bumpy taught him how to sell drugs, that is a bold-faced, I don't want to use the ugly word, but it's a bold-faced damn lie.
There always was hope. There definitely was hope in spite of no work, in spite of the drugs. And that hope went away in 1968 when Martin Luther King was shot and killed.
When we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last.
But you know, we had to have a hero. We didn't have heroes at that time. In my era, Jackie Robinson was my hero.
You could meet anybody up, Juba Dundee, Ali.
Muhammad Ali was a hero because he stood up to the man. You know, he said, I'm not going to Vietnam. And then they put him in jail, but now they glorify him. He is a hero. They treated us very shabbily in those days, and not so well during these days.
I'm not labeling them criminals, but it was, Bumpy Johnson, and it was Nicky Bonds, and it was later Matthews. And these people became heroes These people, they openly defied the system. A system that wasn't working, by the way.
Very, very difficult for a black man to achieve anything in a white society.
I guess people came from different neighborhoods. They came from North Carolina, the migration of a lot of African-American families in the 40s and the 30s and the 50s to New York City to get dominant in a certain industry and a trade, and the drug traffickers did the same thing.
Tonight, our reporter Brian Ross has found that the familiar organized mob, or mafia, now has some competition, particularly in the business of smuggling and selling hard drugs. Competitors who use their own methods to bring their merchandise into this country.
There was said to be over 250,000 known heroin addicts and as much as 1 million heroin addicts that wasn't known. Okay, so that made a lot of traffic. And there could be 10 crews on one block, and all 10 crews would make money.
Only a few of them, their names got out, like Nicky Barnes and Frank Lucas to a lesser extent, Robert Stepney to a lesser extent. Nicky Barnes was the most prolific, well-known, major black heroin dealer in Harlem, name-wise. Frank Lucas was probably his equal or below in the heroin trade.
They talk about the country boys, they speak about Frank Lucas.
Everybody knew who Frank was. Frank would, he'd park his Cadillac in the street, but he'd give a couple of kids $5 a piece. No money, chump change to him.
It was getting heroin that was between 82 and 90-some% pure, which you could step on all day and still, it would be real good and make a lot of money. And so that's what they was doing. They cut the middleman out. Frank Lucas cut the middleman out by bringing it in from Burma. Now they don't have to go through the Guineas. They don't have to go through the Chinese. They direct, and they was making money, and they was doing a lot of business.
The Italians really controlled it in the 60s and late 60s and the early 70s because they had the direct connection with France, with the Marseille heroin labs. And the French would smuggle it into New York or through Canada, Montreal, with the organized crime from Montreal down into New York. And the Italians, mostly from Little Italy, but predominantly from Pleasant Avenue, which is in East Harlem. But there was an Italian stronghold there. And many of those, they controlled the distribution to the blacks and to the Spanish in Harlem out of the Bronx and Pleasant Avenue, Manhattan. When the poppy fields in Turkey got decimated because of President Nixon cracked down on or convinced the government of Turkey to get rid of the poppy fields, that started probably the decline of the Italian stronghold on the distribution of heroin.
In the early 70s, heroin addiction was declining in the United States. The number of addicts reached an estimated low of 570,000 in 1973. Now the number is back up to 720,000. There are fears it may soon climb to 1 million. Helping feed the increase is a resurgence of opium farming in Turkey.
Like Frank Lucas, he was dealing with a homeboy, his Sarge, who was stationed over there in Bangkok.
We used to call him the Fat Man. Leslie Atkinson was, in my opinion, the most important Asian drug trafficker in terms of supply of Asian heroin to the United States in that era, for certain.
The North Carolina mob is run by men who know a lot about the military. 10 of the top men in this organization are former sergeants in the Army or the Air Force. Federal authorities identify this man as the head of the North Carolina mob. Leslie Ike Atkinson, Goldsboro, North Carolina, former Master Sergeant, United States Army.
There was a transformation from the French Connection to Middle East and even Southeastern Asian heroin at that point in time. And there was a lot of scurrying around for new sources of supply.
he made a move and they was using the body bags to get it back in the country. I had been in the military, and you know, when a body bag comes back, it's inspected and tagged in the port of deportation, and it's not touched anymore till it reaches home, to the funeral home, whoever picks it up, and so that's how they got it in without any problem.
Of course, you put it in the coffin. I mean, you're not harming anyone, are you? Yeah, I mean, half of the time you'll find that that is the best way.
We had information in our files of a fellow named Sutherland who had been arrested in the States impersonating himself as a military officer on an aircraft that was bringing coffins with dead GIs from Vietnam back to the States for burial. So that certainly raised suspicion that could have been a method of smuggling. However, it was never proven. Now, it could have been a trial run, but we never had any evidence.
Here was an ex-GI, okay, who may or may not have been hooked up. I don't know if there was a relationship between him and Atkinson, but there could very well have been, okay? But it showed how black Americans were getting to be major players in the heroin business from their service in Vietnam.
I became the case agent for the Atkinson investigation in 1975, in the spring of 1975. And although we knew that the Atkinson-Jackson group was involved with Frank Lucas, there was no indication that he was ever operating out of Thailand.
In 1971, it had been decided that the U.S. government would give Okinawa back to the Japanese.
Jackson was actually arrested in 1972 in Colorado as he was receiving a shipment of heroin that had been sent to the States from Bangkok. And so he was in prison, I think, for 30 years, and it was Atkinson that actually took over kind of both ends of the operation.
We met with this particular drug dealer who was under the protection of a Colonel Primone. This colonel was a friend of the U.S. government, a friend of the DEA, and he was sent out of the country on a visit to Washington. And the individual that we met undercover, we took a letter of introduction from a drug dealer in Okinawa to him, and he met with us, and he quietly informed us that if you cause me any problems, we'll kill you.
I recruited a team of Thai citizens to act as surveillance of the group, the members of the group that we were aware of, to kind of understand their method of operation.
Last year, Martin Pera directed the federal government's investigation of the North Carolina mob. Pera says law enforcement officials were slow to acknowledge the importance of this new mob because its leaders are black, not mafia members.
To start working on these upstarts, on these new people, wasn't interesting because you got the most points for working on a good mafia guy who had been memorialized as a bad guy from way back.
Is this network of black, non-commissioned military officers still active today?
Oh, yes, I would say so.
This is black organized crime?
Yes, yes. In a nutshell, that's exactly what it is.
There have always been blacks in organized crime operations, but never at the top. This new mob has already staked out much of the heroin business for itself, and authorities say it is beginning to use its well-disciplined organization to compete with the mafia in other areas of criminal activity. The North Carolina mob is this country's newest organized crime family.
the real break came when a couple of GIs were arrested in Tokyo with heroin that they had smuggled out of Thailand. They agreed to cooperate, actually, with agents in our San Francisco office of DEA. And based on that, we were able to identify the individual that introduced those two GIs to the fellow who actually sold the heroin to them. And we were able to gain the cooperation of that individual who had made the introduction, and he introduced a DEA undercover agent to this source of supply, who turned out to be the source of supply for the Atkinson group.
Atkinson is now in federal prison, but authorities believe he still runs the North Carolina mob.
Again, it's my understanding that Herman Jackson and Leslie Atkinson started the operation, and I'm not familiar with any role that Frank Lucas played in those early days, although again, it's certainly possible.
Frank Lucas and Ike Atkinson. Ike had the connection over in the Golden Triangle because he was a soldier over there. He was related somehow to Frank Lucas, I think by marriage. And now Frank could get his drugs from Ike at dirt costs. And if it's say it was $2,000 in say Thailand, another $8,000 per kilo for transportation, and you don't bring back 1 kilo, you might as well bring back 20, 30 kilos. Much cheaper.
According to what I understand, he was a major distributor of heroin in the New York City area, but did not play a big role, at least in the period of time when I was investigating that group in Thailand.
And then what they would do, they wouldn't sell a kilo to somebody else. They would take that 1 kilo, as I said before, instead of having 1 kilo at 90%, you'll have 30 kilos at 3%. And if you put $300,000 per kilo times 30, more money than you could count.
Listen to me very carefully so you have a crystal clear understanding of how things was. It was a time when Harlem was narcotic central for the eastern seaboard, from Maine to Miami and everything east of the Mississippi River. If a motherfucker wanted some heroin, he had to come to Harlem. Boston, Detroit, Chicago, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Memphis, Tennessee, Nashville, Atlanta, Delaware, Newark, Atlantic City, Savannah, Miami, Jacksonville, they all had to come to New York because New York City was narcotic central. And narcotic central in New York City was Harlem, New York.
We didn't only set the trend in New York City, we set the trend everywhere. Everybody wanted to wear what P.B. Kirkland wore.
As long as there was this need for drugs in the black community, there was someone willing to supply this need.
It's 100 bosses in that area. 100, if not more.
If it wasn't outside the big track, guys losing 230,000 ounces, you wouldn't really know it. You know how much 500,000 ounces was back then?
These people out here like flies, like they were giving out free money.
When that movie came out, Cotton Coming Homes, I was riding a Rolls Royce. It went that early. And I didn't have a license. I was a kid. I was old enough.
They started making money hand over fist.
I had 2 sets of jury. One set of jury basically was for the streets, because I understood how the streets roll, because I'm in the streets, right? And the other set of jury was investments, because people was going over in Africa, you understand what I'm saying, and coming back with the diamond. So the way I was buying diamonds was the same way it was the other game. You see what I'm saying?
Nicky was the guy too.
Each trying to show each other up in the neighborhoods in Harlem as the major guy. Frank would have an entourage of 4 or 5 people when he went to the nightclubs, throwing hundreds and hundreds of dollars around. And then Nicky Barnes would be there too. So I think it's probably competition in lifestyle and in the neighborhood for the recognition in the neighborhood. And I think they clashed because of that.
So Frank had money, but I just don't know Frank like I know Nick was an older gangster in the street. Nicky was real, like Bumpy was real. I just didn't know Frank's name like that out in the street. You see what I'm saying?
I mean, with most people at the top in the same industry, they're egos. And so there's some type of competition going back and forth. But each one was trying to increase market share in their occupation, which was heroin trafficking.
Oh, the man did marvelous work, beyond a shadow of a doubt. He got it treetop tall, enjoyed all the finer things in life.
But obviously, at some point when I went away, Frank must have got money, because I remember a girl, when I came home, her mother, Marguerite Mays, had gave me a surprise birthday party, because I didn't want a birthday party. You know, back then, you didn't want a party when you came home. Not the younger guys, the old heads, that was a thing that they did, right? So when I came home, I was supposed to go to the house for another reason. When I got there, it was a little surprise. And I'm in the bedroom talking to her, and she offered me, she said, I got something for you. I said, what is it? She said, 600,000 ounces. So I said, what you mean 600,000? Where would you get 600,000? I'm thinking she kidding. She said, Frank gave it to me. I'm holding it for him. I'm thinking it was Frank Matthews, because he's a money kid. But it was Frank Lucas. I said, oh yeah? Because I was a guy that didn't violate the principles of the game, the code of the streets. You never was gonna get me to disrespect a guy for no reason and under no circumstances. So all I'm saying to you is, here's a lady saying, here's 600,000 I'm saying, no, I ain't gonna take this man's money. You gotta be kidding. I said, let me say something to you. Anybody that's got 600,000 to give you the whole, has got another 10 to have your head taken off.
A 40-block area of Harlem has found 18,000 narcotics addicts among the 58,000 residents there.
I remember, I think the police officer said, do you know who we are? And the drug dealer says, yeah. But if you ain't out here to buy drugs, get the fuck off the corner.
Mr. Kissinger and his people who are responsible for narcotic enforcement policy forego that trip to Turkey, forego that trip to Switzerland, and come down to 116th Street and 8th Avenue. Take his bodyguards in his armored car, and if he doesn't want to, I'll walk with him through the streets of Harlem and let them see what is actually going on, because the people who are making these policies, I call them the pencil pushers who don't know which end the erasers are on, have never been up there. They don't know what's going on.
And you have to remember, these drug dealers are making millions and millions of dollars. They're taking your innocent treasures, your children, and making them drug addicts. They'll give them drugs for free, and they know they have them hooked for the rest of their lives. So they'll give you a turkey for Thanksgiving, or they'll give you some money so you won't be evicted from your house, and the word is that you were a good person. But that was only superficial.
The response to this to these films has been essentially from three different points of view. Those that were looking at it from the point of view of the destruction of the Harlem community, and those that were looking at these individuals as the worst possible kind of individuals, and then there were those that looked at them as heroes also.
The drug dealers would ride on this wave of black power and black exploitation, that you didn't need the whites. We could do it ourselves, you know, and that's why the drug dealers in the black community were people of significance. And he might be a drug dealer, but he is our drug dealer.
This whole drug thing never was something legal. It always was something illegal. And I think some guys get trapped into doing it so long that they begin to think that they're legal and the cops ain't legal. The one thing that Barnes and Lucas have in common is both of them come from backgrounds of extreme poverty and neglect, you understand?
That money never found its way back in, so there just was this total feeling of neglect.
The role models were the people who they found in the community, in the streets.
I came on during the heels of the Vietnam War. A lot of my personal friends went to Vietnam as 18, 19-year-olds and came back addicted to heroin. And these were kids that we just would go to parties, hang out with the girls, and now they were heroin addicts. And DEA was formed, and I went in there as a single mission because I'm going to now arrest the major narcotic dealers that ruined the lives of all my friends growing up in the projects in New York City.
Out the 60s and 70s, we watched these communities deteriorate. They didn't deteriorate, and these communities weren't destroyed by drug dealers. These communities were destroyed by governmental neglect, right? Economic neglect. All the jobs fled to the suburbs, and we're seeing this in now we're seeing what happened to Harlem at the end of the 60s and going into the 70s, the deterioration of these communities. We're seeing this in industrial communities all across this country.
Families destroyed. You know the heartbreak of a family when their son or daughter, 14 years old, uses heroin and dies? That family is never the same. Never the same.
This is the feud between Frank and Nicky, reputation.
And they were both operating in the same playground, basically, Harlem. Harlem was their center. Harlem is where they lived. Harlem was where the neighborhood saw these people, but their distribution chain was up and down the eastern seaboard.
Lucas was known, but I don't think, in my opinion, that he was on that same level as Nicky Barnes or a Frank Matthews. I think he was a significant dealer, don't get me wrong. He had his areas of trade, but I don't think realistically you could put him quite the same level as Barnes or Matthews at that time.
There came a time when we received intelligence from UID, Unified Intelligence Division, which was a unit of the Drug Enforcement Administration. And they told us that the country boys were looking to whack Nicky.
And Frank had the temerity, he put out a contract on Nicky.
Sent me to Rikers Island, to the ACM, to the maximum security block on 1B. They brought the Frank Lucas dude in, but just prior to him coming in, we had got a newspaper article about his case, and in that newspaper article it also stated something about he had a contract on Nicky Barnes. I asked him actually, you got a problem with Nick with Nick? And this motherfucker was scared. This motherfucker was scared to death in there, and said, "Nah, me and Nick is the best of friends." You know what I'm saying? And with the little trembling lip shit.
And there came a moment when I asked, yes, what's this thing about the country boys looking to whack Nicky? And he looked at me like, what are you talking about?
I had worked with Jones and Abruzzo prior to going to the Essex County Bureau of Narcotics. When I went to Essex County, Jones and Abruzzo were already working on this group called the Country Boys.
Well, I was a member of the North Narcotics Squad with my partner, Detective Benny Abruzzo. We had gotten a number of complaints in from the police director that the citizens in the area of Howard Street projects and West Kenny project couldn't come out because of the narcotics taking place at the time.
Myself and Eddie Jones were partners in the Newark Police Narcotics Squad, and we developed some informants that gave us information that a group of guys were in the projects and they were selling drugs, and they were selling good quality drugs. And they were known as the Country Boys.
Jones and Abruzzo then approached me and asked me if I could assist them in getting them transferred up to the Essex County Bureau of Narcotics and work with them on the investigation.
Shorty, who was known as Vernon Lee Lucas, was getting his drugs from New York City from his brother, his older brother, Frank Lucas.
All of the guys that were involved in this were called the Country Boys. That's what we had dubbed their names. All of the brothers who were involved had the last name of Lucas. Shorty Lucas was the main guy in the New Jersey area that we knew of. Once Detective Jones and Abruzzo had secured the drugs and secured Eddie James, they were able to flip him before they even walked out of the door.
There was about approximately 7.5 pounds of heroin, and when we submitted it for analysis, we found out that it was basically 80 to 90% pure.
We had secured, I think it was about 7 arrests and all of the drugs, which was about $20 million worth of pure heroin.
We placed James under arrest, and we began talking to him, and he basically said, listen, I'm going to give you everything. And at that point, he went on to tell us who was implicated, who was going to come in the morning to bag up the drugs. And so at that point, we told Spearman. Spearman called Richie Roberts, who was home in bed at the time, and then told him to get the warrants ready because we were going to hit all the locations that we had from Mr. James.
Richie Roberts did not give us the appropriate credit that he should have given us. He could have mentioned our names on some of his interviews. Even now, he's doing interviews and still not saying too much about the detectives who actually did the job. It's like we were just there.
Through his testimony and through the testimony of another informant, Richie Roberts was able to gain the indictment of 34 other people, Frank Lucas being one of the 34 other people. Now, Frank Lucas was already been arrested in New York by the New York detectives, by the DEA and the New York detectives.
Well, we, DEA and New York City Police Department, Organized Crime Control Bureau detectives had formed an ad hoc task force to work a major heroin case against the Gambino crime family. We were successful in arresting several of these major suppliers, organized crime guys who was supplying dealers in Harlem and in East Harlem. And as a result of that investigation, we received information that Frank Lucas had been doing business with these members of organized crime and had received a number of heroin packages, shipments from these individuals over the last several years.
At one point, we were working with Sterling Johnson, who I think he was a New York, Manhattan District Attorney. We had different locations in New York where they were cutting. We continued to work the investigation right up until the time of the trial. The trial lasted, I would say, about, I think it was 6 weeks. At that time, I sat next to Richie Roberts throughout the 6-week period because Richie Roberts didn't know who was who.
Frank Lucas was taken down by DEA and the New York City Police Department in 1975.
We got the information from both of these individuals who had decided to cooperate with the government upon their arrest. We took that information to the U.S. Attorney's Office, went before a judge, and were authorized a search warrant for Frank Lucas's residence in Teaneck, New Jersey. And after receiving that search warrant, a group of NYPD detectives and DEA agents went out to New Jersey, and we executed that search warrant at Lucas's house in the evening. Shortly thereafter, in the backyard, a window opened on the first floor, and several gym bag type of luggage came out the window, thrown out the window. We brought the money inside later, had a chance to count the money, and if I remember correctly, it totaled at the end of the night about $584,000 in cash.
It's a very, very bad thing for Harlem.
All the luxuries of life that a motherfucker in the game strive for, but in the end, it don't count. Because the nigga told, man, it don't count when you rap, player.
And he received a 40-year sentence and then a 30-year on top of that. and he appealed it. The conviction, I believe, was in '76. In 1977, the appeal was turned down, and at that point he was looking at 70 years, and he approached the United States Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York to see if he could get a reduction in his sentence by cooperating. And that's when I became personally involved in him.
Nicky Barnes and Frank Lucas were both operating around the same time. I'm not exactly sure the sequence of events, but both wind up going to jail at around the same time also. I think Frank may have went to jail first, and then Nicky may have went to jail probably at about 1977.
When somebody like that offers to cooperate, you don't immediately jump into bed with them and say, okay, but you have to listen to them to see what they have to say and to see if you can run with it. You corroborate what they're saying. So it's a give and take point. And at some point, the United States Attorney's Office made a decision that they would follow whatever he was willing to offer us. And that's when we got involved in the DEA.
Literally become a snitch nation, you know, where if you see something, say something, has become where we're heading. Yeah.
He was a prolific heroin dealer, and he did still have connections. He would, even though the word was out, sort of, that he was cooperating, he still had the ability to convince people on the street that he wasn't, and he could make introductions.
No, I remember as a kid going to school, you know, learning about Benedict Arnold, you know, one of America's first traders, you know. If they put that label on you as being a Benedict Arnold, you know, it's something they taught in grade school.
I'm going to answer another question. You just says I'm not under arrest and I'm going to walk out.
As the story goes, that they arrested Herbie and he was in one room, and they had arrested his mother for violation of federal narcotics laws, and she was in another room. And that the agents told Herbie, we have your mother. She's under arrest for violation of narcotics laws, federal narcotics laws, but we can do some deals if you would cooperate. And as the story goes, Herbie looked the agents in the eye and said, my mom can do her time. Now you fast forward to the 90s and the year 2000, and you see the advent, the breakdown in organized crime, where John Gatti's trusted number 2, Sammy Gravano, realized that the government was his best friend in terms of making a deal to get out of 19 murders and walked out of federal prison, only to commit crimes and go back again. But nowadays, nobody wants to go to jail. You have a generation that says, well, I don't like this guy anyway, and if I have to give him up or give up the organization to get out, I'm going to get out.
Someone like him, specifically, he was doing 70 years. So what they would first do is see if he could, if he would tell on everybody in his organization, and then you would put together a conspiracy case while he's in jail, not while he's out.
The cooperation with law enforcement is always a sensitive subject, and it's something that law enforcement needs to further the investigation, but it's something that you really don't want to talk about when people cooperate, because for the obvious reasons, you know, you don't want to really talk about that. But suffice to say that the only way, one of the few ways to reduce a long prison sentence is that you cooperate, and you cooperate fully. And the more information and evidence you give, you will increase the chances of shaving off significant jail time off your sentence. And I think during that time, Frank was facing 70 years. I think Nicky Barnes, when he was convicted, he was life in prison. And this is the 1970s. As far as I know, they weren't giving those Paris Hilton kind of deals where you can get out if you had a headache.
Seeing all that about, you know, people testifying against cops and things like that, let me tell you something, man. When you understand the code of the game, man, you look at that stand, and you see somebody sitting on that stand testifying against somebody, the one thing you know that's embedded in your mind till the day you die, you don't know what's going to happen with your life. None of us can predict the future, but you know one thing is for certain, that you're never, ever, ever going to see yourself on that stand. Never. In a million years. You understand? I'm testifying against nobody. See, a businessman makes the best business decision.
So when he's confronted with a situation, whether to get 3 years or 10 years, he makes a business decision. I'm gonna get 3 years. And he's not willing to suffer the consequences of his action. See, I came up in a world where my loyalty is to the life that I live, not to an individual, not to an organization, but my loyalty is to the life that I live. And the life that I live is that you hold your water under any and all circumstances. Sometimes you make decisions with other people who wind up not strong, weak, soft as cotton, but that's on you, man. That's a decision you made. And you can't let their weaknesses determine your decisions. And you hold your water, man, when the time comes.
No, make no mistake about it. The top people in the narcotics industry, this is a business to them. And the business is making money. And there is really no loyalty. It's all about money, okay? And they make business decisions. If the decision is that I cooperate, if I tell what I know, I will get out of jail, people make a business decision to get out of jail.
Question, no, we wouldn't let him out on the street to cooperate, to try to drum up business, if you will. He had a knack, like I said before, for convincing people on the phone. He worked the phones all day long while in jail, trying to convince people on the street that he would never give them up, and would they meet one of his people who would be an undercover DEA agent.
But when they come after you and investigate you, the penalties are going to be at the highest level. And one of the few ways of getting out from under that sentence is cooperation.
Listen, when I was a young man, my first major narcotic bust, 2 black police had me in the precinct. I'm fly, they fly. They had a store named AJ Lester. We had all fly shit on. And they playing me. I ain't mad at them. They got a job to do. They trying to use psychology. Yo, brother, you understand? Don't you know, the white man bring a thing in the country. Don't you be a victim. I said, man, I don't have nothing to say. So they kept on, which is their job. I ain't mad at them. They got to pay for their kid teeth, their mortgage, their health insurance. Do you, player? Don't involve me.
And he would also come up with information from talking to people. Again, he was constantly on the phone from jail with people that he knew and trusted on the outside, who would trust him.
You can help us, help us, help you. You can help yourself, zizazoo. I say, player, I don't have nothing to say. So after a while, I said, you know something, man, give me a pencil and paper. They was running all around in the room, get a pencil and paper, maybe he ready to cooperate. And I put on the paper, I have nothing to say. And I held it up. Police smacked the shit out of me. But they stopped bothering me. But they smacked the shit out of me, though.
Whatever time he gave you, knew what this game was about. Just deal with the time that he give you.
Let's face reality, man. You was who you was. Like the young kids say nowadays, it is what it is, man.
I'm going to put it to you like this. If you have a long jail sentence and your jail sentence is cut dramatically, obviously you had to get some good information.
With him, it was a number of years after he was in jail, and the people that he was dealing with were either the Italians had already cooperated themselves, and they're the ones that actually gave up Frank his sources of supply, and the others were either gone, dead, or also in jail.
Well, with Bonds and Lucas, you know, they're part of that same element. Lucas was betrayed, and then he turned around and became a betrayer. You know, Bonds felt that he was betrayed, and he turned around and, you know, sought revenge, and thus he became a betrayer. You know?
Let me say this about Nicky. Sure, when I you know, look at the clips of that movie, I see Nicky more than that, because Nicky was a guy, one of the older guys. There was a couple of older guys. I mean, these guys was guys that you had to respect as hustlers back then. You understand what I'm saying? Because if I'd have looked at the shit that you talk about today, I never would have been in the game in my life, and that's part of what could make me get out of the game and understood I was never getting back in the game, because I seen the principles and the code of the game start to deteriorate and go down. And now, when I was in the game, a guy went away and he came home, we gave him a piece of money. We made sure his wife was all right. We never would violate that code. We never would disrespect people. We never would let nobody else disrespect you. If you ain't in the street to handle your man, we handle it for you. You handle yours when you went away. We handle everything in the street till you came out.
Anytime you have an organization, my experience, that doesn't have any moral code or a code of conduct. It's all about money. It's going to crash sooner or later. And that's what happened in drug organizations, because it'll crash internally, because people may get addicted to the drugs. They may steal the profits. Can crash from the outside, because not only is the New York City Police Department looking at these guys, but the DEA is looking at these guys, and other police agencies throughout the state are looking at these guys. So sooner or later, with all that intense scrutiny, internal and external, the organization is going to crash. And then when it does crash, the penalties are so high, especially on the federal level, on the minimum mandatories because of the Organized Crime Control Bill, that the only departure from the sentencing guidelines is cooperation. One of the few ways to get out is cooperation.
What usually happens in situations where trust is betrayed, betrayal begets betrayal.
So when things start to change and guys start to disrespecting one another all over about women and I mean, it was ridiculous. I knew the game was over. You understand? I knew it was history. Then the next thing you know, the stitching came. But Nicky, the Nicky that I know, was a stand-up, hard rock, original badass. You understand? Now, Nicky, it wasn't nothing weak about Nicky. And I know a lot of people don't like me saying this, but you know, I got to tell it like it is. I don't give a damn what nobody like. If I put my word on, like I said, I put my life on. Nicky was original badass. There's no question.
So Nicky, in a way, ironically, ambiguously, he fortified another principle. Violate honor, violate morals, violate the principles that we have. Treat each brother as you treat yourself. Well, he wasn't treated like that. They dishonored him.
Loyalty and trust was important, as it's important in any relationship. You know, I mean, whether it's between a parent and child, a husband and wife, you know, friends, business partners, you know. At the core of every relationship, there's the element of trust. That's number one, because there cannot be no relationship without trust.
But the reality is he got caught in a situation that nobody can convince me Nicky wouldn't have did life over life over life, because Nicky wasn't about that. But he got caught in a situation where in his mind he felt like whatever kind of agreement he had with the people he was, that they violated the agreement, they shouldn't have did the things he did, and they got to look back at that and ask themselves, should they have done it? Because he let that flip him over. Now me, it would have never flipped me over. But I might, you know, I can't speak for another man, because if I ain't gonna wear another man's shoes, speak out another man's mouth, because I'm not gonna lay in another man's grave.
Be honest with ourselves. You know, the worst thing, the thing that we find most painful and hurtful is when we're betrayed by somebody that we trust. Isn't that true? I think it's true. Like a chain reaction, you know. You betray me, I get revenge. My revenge incorporates betrayal of you. Maybe that's the way for me to get back at you, you know.
As a result of being dishonored, Nicky sought the only justice that he could was to get back at them. The only way he could get back at them, because he was in the joint, was to inform, okay? Now, if Nicky was out on the street, it would have been a different story. All right? He would have whacked half of these guys. Or would have took a baseball bat to them and sought his own justice that way. So now you have, what's really the difference in some respects? He got justice, but if he would have been in the street, it would have been a different kind of justice. But in the joint, that was the only kind of justice he could have gotten.
So without having, passing any moral judgment on anybody or whatever, you know, I'm opposed to betrayal. You know, trust is very important to me in every relationship, you know. And if I detect any deviation, I mean, if I have any reason to doubt the trust of a person I'm in a relationship with, I generally end those relationships.
So whatever Nicky did is on Nicky. Only Nicky understood why he did what he did. I only understood the Nicky before he did what he did. I don't know that other Nicky. You know what I mean? And but I see them kids guy, and you know, your heart go out. I mean, some of them I knew, little kids in the street when I left, you know?
That's why they have divorces, you know. And that's why people go to court and fight their way out of contracts, or you know, they don't want to do business with people anymore. It's simply because there's been you know, the element of trust. There's some question about it.
No, it didn't change the rules, because the rule is you don't inform. And again, I think we've made it clear here that Nicky informed for other reasons. But still, informing, flipping on your people for a better deal is always a no-no. Never.
In the case of Barnes, who I know personally, I didn't know Lucas to that degree. He was betrayed. According to him, he was betrayed by the mother of his children. He was betrayed by his girlfriend. He was betrayed by his protege, Guy Fisher. He was betrayed by a guy that he befriended and showed love, Mr. Johnson. All four of these people came into his life as a result of his own choices. Now, that's kind of a difficult thing to live with there, man. To accept the fact that you made bad decisions. It's a complicated thing because maybe they felt justified in doing what they did, and I don't know what the case may be, But when you make bad decisions, sometimes you have to live with them. You have to live with them. You can't go around blaming the whole world for your bad decisions, man. You made bad decisions. You understand? They came back and bit you on your ass. You understand? Maybe you might, you had two options there. You either accept that, you understand what I mean? Or deal with it. And I guess he chose to use the federal government to get back at them.
Which all comes behind one of the most formidable forces in the street, respect. Respect. You disrespected me.
If you want trust and loyalty, then you need to give trust and loyalty. You understand what I'm talking about?
But the worst kind of informant is the guy that flips for a deal. That's the guy who's the worst, okay? Frank flipped for a deal, from what I know.
Put a guy in a cell 23 hours a day, and all of his pills are exhausted. I think you need to be a little more concerned about how you treat that person. Betrayal is a two-way street. It don't just happen out of nowhere, right? And that said, I'll probably be misinterpreted and misunderstood here, like everybody else. But the fact of the matter is, man, the abused child becomes the abuser, man.
The most wickedest lie you could ever tell in your entire life is the one that you tell to yourself.
We see idleness. We see idleness. And this is the results of poverty, lack of opportunity, failed public schools, and a governmental system that really doesn't give a damn what happens to these kids. Their response to them is to lock them up, throw away the key, turn their communities into open-air prisons. And what do you think these kids are going to do? What do you think they're going to do? You think they're all going to end up on a football field, a basketball court? Or they're going to be all rap stars? No, they're not. They're going to fill the prisons, and they're going to follow the same track that youth have always followed. When there's no opportunity, they're going to try to find a way to get some. You keep bombarding them with these advertisements every day. These big cars, these mansions, these clothes, diamonds, beautiful women, trips all around the world. And all day long you're feeding them this. At the same time, you're not showing them how to get there. You're not giving them the means to get there. You're saying this is success. It's a 10-foot wall, and they got a 5-foot ladder. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to do the same thing that Bonds, Lucas, Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, and all the rest of the gangsters that you glorify in your movies and media, the Sopranos. They're going to do the same things. They're going to try to find innovative ways to get to that level of success.
And y'all got a chance today. Today, the young generation today is the fastest growing money making legally than they ever been.
My message to young people is, you can do it. All us can do it. You understand what I'm saying? This game is not a death sentence. When you make a mistake going to life of crime as a kid, you just made a mistake. Could be the conditions, could be you following somebody else. That's not your life, kid. You go to jail, sit down and watch that brick wall, sit and watch them bars after a while. You can come back out and be another person. Don't let 1, 2, 3 felonies hold you back. But you can't come out bitter. You can't come out mad. You can't come out thinking that the world owes you something. Don't nobody owe you shit. They didn't owe me nothing. I made my choice. I ain't never complained in the joint to nobody one time.